Hereby I open this academic ceremony in which Alessandro Concari will defend the academic thesis Understanding Waste Separation Behavior through the application of an extended form of the theory of plant behavior. May I invite you to present a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis.
Dear Prorectors, dear members of the Corona, dear families and friends, dear distinguished guests, good afternoon. Dear Prorector, thank you for giving me the chance to speak about my thesis. In the next 15 minutes, I will describe the topic that you just mentioned. So I will go through, I will give you a little bit of background, starting from the literature review, a bibliometric analysis. Then I will go through the main theoretical framework. Then I'll show you a couple of applications of the extended theory of plant behavior, another application of the theory of reasoned goal pursuit, and I will come to some conclusion, recommendation, and practical implication. So let me first frame a little the topic. So as you can see on the slide, on the left side, you see that the percentage of recycling in the European Union is quite varied. There are countries like Germany and Austria that are above 60–70% of recycling, while there are other countries like Malta that are at very low percentage. On the right side, you see there is also a different level of percentage in terms of packaging of waste, municipal solid waste, and electrical and electronic waste. As you notice, in some cases the trend is slightly rising, like in the case of the municipal solid waste, and the case of packaging is quite stagnating in the last 5 years. This data, for your information, comes from the European Environmental Agency. In this slide, you see the situation, how critical it is in Rome. So in Rome, as you can see, also in front of important buildings, trash is not daily collected. And as you can see in this graphs, you may notice that the percentage is around 45%. So in the last 5 to 6 years, there is no real change in the level of recycling. This video probably gives you a better explanation of how critical is the situation. Wild animals come to the city to get food because waste is not daily collected. So now I move to the first outcomes of my systematic literature review on pro-environmental consumer behavior. So the big picture, the main indication is that the number of papers in the last years, as you can see from, let's say, in the last 10 years, is almost exponentially growing, indicating an increased attention on this topic. On the right side, you see the main journals, and as you can expect, considering the topic is pro-environmental consumer behavior, the main journals who publish on this topic are Environment and Behavior, Resource Conservation, Recycling, and Journal of Cleaner Production. Another outcome of this systematic literature review, as you can see on the left side, is there are some countries which are very productive in the European Union, like the UK, Italy, Germany, and Spain. Actually, if you balance this data for the number of inhabitants, you may understand that other countries like Denmark, Lithuania, Portugal, Slovenia, and the UK again are quite productive because obviously they have a reduced population, but they still are very interested on this topic. Another outcome of the systematic literature review, as you can see on the left-hand side, are the key factors and conditions. So my research had the objective to try to give a little bit of order to the numerous factors. So beside the factor rotating around the individual, I grouped the factor into legal and institutional factors, collective factors, to give you an idea the presence of pro-environmental organization, contextual factors, like the presence of a polluted area or like the distance from recycling bin, then informational factor and infrastructural factors. Another outcome of my systematic literature review was the limited interplay between these two types of consumer, pro-environmental consumer and generic consumer. I can tell you something more later on. Now, the third chapter, my second article, is about bibliometrics and text mining. As you can see in the slide, basically, bibliometric and text mining help me individuating 3 macro areas. As you can see, the light blue one is on intention and attitude. Then there is a red one on waste management system. You can see some keywords like recycling, collection, and system. And a third area is on food, the green one. As you can see, the topics are, the recurring terms or keywords are food waste, food, consumer, and product. Again, this data comes from the software VOS Viewer, as you can see on the bottom left-hand side, and the time frame is 1975 to 2020. One more thing quite interesting from the bibliometrics research was that basically throughout the years, as you can see here, from the year 2000 coming to nowadays, there are 2 main clusters. One is on attitude, and another one is on a more generic topic involving recycling, consumer behavior, and municipal solid waste. As you can see, this cluster developed from 2010, and it broke down into different parts like attitude, willingness to pay, municipal solid waste, etc. Now, let's talk about the theoretical framework, because my thesis focused on the theoretical part. So as you can see in the upper part, there is the theory of reasoned action, which is one of the most diffuse theory to explain waste separation behavior. At the bottom, you see the evolution of the theory of reasoned action, this one, and it is the theory of planned behavior. Now, there are quite a few differences between the two theories. I can say that one of the most evident differences is related to the addition of the construct of perceived behavioral control. Always talking about the most diffuse theoretical framework, it's worth to mention the norm activation model from Schwartz in 1977, and its evolution, the value belief norm model from Stern. In this case, we start from, let's say, an analysis of values. As you can see on the left, there may be biospheric values, social altruistic values, egoistic values. Then we move to the analysis of belief. As you can see, there are quite a few commonalities between the norm activation model and the value belief model. So basically, we analyze the awareness of consequences of the individuals, the ascription of responsibilities, and personal norms. And then we define some sort of behaviors. In this case, as you can see, value belief norm model define environmental activism, environmental citizenship, policy support, and sorry, there is a mistake, private sphere behaviors. Now, let's look at the first case study. My first case study was an extended TPB model, extended because, as you can see here, I added, beside the typical construct that you can see on the right side, I added environmental motivation, past behavior, functionality of road beams, and habits. Now, we can discuss later the details, but the key point is the outcome of my study are that basically habits, although normally not considered in the case of waste separation, as a significant influence on attitudes, subjective norms, and especially perceived behavioral control, and also some direct influence on intention. At the same time, environmental motivation has a quite significant, as you can see here, influence on attitude and on habit as well. Differently, past behavior and functionality of road beams have a limited influence on the precursor of intention. When I say precursor, I mean this type of construct. Now, looking at the second case study I did, that was on the theory of the reasoned goal pursuit. Basically, I wanted to understand if the effect of goals, and so here, as you can see, there are two types of goals, active procurement goals and active approval goal. I wanted to understand if, in the case of waste separation behavior, goals have a significant effect. At the same time, I wanted to check if the new construct of motivation, I say new compared to the theory of planned behavior, had a significant impact on intention. So in the next slide, in this slide, you see actually some figures that confirm that the construct of active procurement goal has a significant influence on attitude and also a direct attitude, as you can see here, on motivation. Vice versa, active approval goal has a significant influence on norms, but it does not have a significant direct influence on motivation. So, as you can understand, active procurement goal plays a quite important role in waste separation behavior. In addition, as you can see, motivation is a new construct which is placed between the typical TPB precursor. When I say TPD, I mean theory of planned behavior. So motivation is placed between attitude and norms and intention. This new construct is useful to explain why sometimes, although we have the intention to do, the attitude and the perceived behavioral control to perform an action, sometimes this attitude does not transform in intention. In this case, the construct of motivation helps explaining why, in this case, waste separation, attitude, and perceived behavioral control transform into intention. Now, in the last 2 minutes, I'm going to give you, to recap the conclusion and some recommendation. As you can see in bullet number 1, my thesis confirmed that understanding human behavior is a key to the success of waste management procedure. If we forget to understand human behavior, most likely waste management procedure are going to fail. Bullet number 2, a correct analysis of waste separation cannot exclude habit, motivation, and goals. So basically, I'm simply telling you that beside the typical construct of the theory of planned behavior, I think that it's useful to add habit, motivation, and goals to better understand why people separate their waste. Bullet number 3, waste separation behavior is a goal-driven. So I personally think, according to my studies, that goal influence separation behavior. And last bullet, TRGP, so the theory of reason and goal pursuit, offers a new framework to analyze human behavior. At present, there are just 2 studies applying the theory of reason and goal pursuit. One is Hamilton together with Eisen, applying to sports activity, to physical activity, and the second study is the study I did with Professor Koch, Professor Martens, and my students in relation to waste separation. Now, few recommendations from my side. One is quite obvious, but it's good to mention. The new theory of reason and goal pursuit needs to be tested in different fields because there are just 2 case studies at present. Waste-related behavior requires greater attention at all levels. I mean, not only individual, but also legal, institutional, at community level. So it has to be, let's say, waste-related behaviors needs to be analyzed at different levels. Recycling campaign have to activate final user pro-environmental goals. Otherwise, the risk is that people do not act in the way we expect them to do. Then intervention needs to be adapted to socio-demographic characteristics because obviously it's difficult intervene. We need different intervention if we refer to young students, for example, or if we are applying this intervention to, for example, to elders. Probably elders do not have pro-environmental goals. Maybe they have other goals that we have to work on. Last bullet, be cautious when adding new construct to an existing theoretical framework because we may increase the variance, so the predictive capability of a theory, but we may not be online with the principle underlying the theories. Very last slide that offers some practical implication. So I think it's important to create a favorable environment to improve waste management. We need, as I said before, an institutional legal supportive framework, And obviously, we have to analyze the goal system of the individuals and to work on their motivation. So as you can see in this final box, it's important to understand the goal structure, both from the decision maker point of view and also from the waste service providers. So this concludes my presentation. I thank you very much for your attention, and I give you back the floor.
Thank you very much for your clear presentation. Before we now move to the discussion part of today's session, let me first introduce the supervisory team here on the other side of you. Professor Martens and Professor Kok. They will not be asking questions according to Maastricht custom for these procedures. And a welcome to the audience, a high-quality audience here in the room, and maybe some more people online. So welcome to you all. My name is Ralph Peters. I'm acting as the pro-rector today and trying to guide you through the ceremony. Now let's then start with your position. This will be opened by Professor Van Lente. Professor Van Lente is Professor of Science and Technology Studies at the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences of this university. And he was chair of the assessment committee and also acting as today's secretary to the degree committee. Professor Van Lente.
Thank you very much. Dear candidate, first of all, I would like to give you compliments for your study, and you provide a set of studies on the question how the activity of waste separation is linked to habits, motivation, and goals. And you try to extend the theory of planned behavior. And well, you also showed now you had this in-depth literature review with bibliometrics and 2 empirical studies. And it's on the letter that I have some questions. In particular, chapter 5, where you seek to extend the theory of planned behavior. And yeah, so that says, as you have shown, that behavior is explained by intention, which is in turn explained by attitude, norms, and perceived behavioral control. And then you state that goal and motivation are less studied, but should be added. And to do that, you use the theory of reasoned goal pursuit, as you have also discussed now. You also said in this presentation that when adding a new construct, one should be cautious. So it's on the letter that I would like to ask you some questions. When reading your conclusion of chapter 5, you say, and I quote, "The results indicate that motivation represents a very reliable proxy of intention to separate." Motivation is a reliable proxy. But when I read your chapter, I thought, well, maybe it's a good proxy because it is the same. So indeed, one could question, is it possible that you have a strong intention to do something but no motivation? I have some quotes that really gives rise to these questions. On page 85, you quote Egli and Chaiken saying that intention represents the person's motivation in the sense of his/her conscious plan to exert effort to carry out the behavior. It represents the person's motivation. And you say, a few sentences later, and I quote, "In very simple words, this construct," so intention, "this construct measures how much an individual aspires to perform a specific behavior." That sounds like motivation to me. So my question is, what is the difference between motivation and intention?
Okay. So, dear Professor Van Lente, actually, highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your question. Now I'm going to elaborate on this, on your questions. So, First of all, let's try to give a correct definition of the different constructs. So motivation is the desire to reach one or more specific goal. At least this is the definition provided by Eisen and Kruglanski. In some parts of their, let's say, of their article on the theory of reasonable goal pursuit, Eisen and Kruglanski highlights that the fact that sometimes a person has the intention to perform a specific behavior is not enough to activate that behavior. So in this case, the role of goals and motivation is basically to sparkle in ignition, if I can put it like this. So the big change between the theory of a planned behavior, so I can refer also to this extended model, is that basically between the typical predictors of intention, we insert the construct of motivation. So the construct of motivation is in this position. In addition, basically, Eisen and Kruglanski decide to add the construct of goals to this, how can I say, to this process. The idea is, on the one end, to explain that people sometimes, or normally, let's say, they act according to some active goals. On the other end, basically, if I can put it in simple words, Eisen and Kruglanski as the construct of motivation to explain that intention alone is not enough to accomplish the action. Then they make a further breakdown between active procurement goals and active approval goals to distinguish. Procurement goal, to give you an example, is the goal to lose weight, while approval goal is a goal that we do to get the approval of, let's say, of significant others. So in this case, the role of motivation is to explain why sometimes, although we have a strong attitude pushing us in a certain direction, sometimes this attitude do not transform in intention. And the construct of motivation in this case is useful to do that. Then another thing that I would like to clarify is that also for me this study was a kind of research. So when I decided to extend the theory of planned behavior model, I decided to add environmental motivation. So let's say that there is quite a bit of difference between the first model and this model. So as you can see, motivation, according to the final definition of in the theory of the reasonable goal pursuit, motivation is basically the last step before intention. So my outcomes will confirm that motivation is an enabler of intention. In this case, let's say the positive thing of this study shows that there is a high level of variance indicating that motivation should be the immediate proxy of intention. I kindly ask you if I answered your question, if you need me to further elaborate on something.
Can I have, yeah, one more? So, so what I really see in your study and what I find very important is that indeed the intention to do something does not imply that people actually do it. So that is the gap.
Yes.
And that is, of course, the importance of studying all this, because that is what, well, we all know this, the human condition or whatever, it is something that we all know. Where I would like to know, what is it possible, so theoretically, conceptually, that one is highly motivated but has no intention? So is that possible?
To be honest, I did not investigate this specific case. What I expect is, I think in theory there may be situation where a motivated person does not reach the intended action, because I know that there are cases like, for example, like addiction, like specific situation where although we have a specific attitude and a specific motivation, this motivation does not translate in intention or in action. The thing that we must say is that the theory of planned behavior is a theory based on volitional behavior. So in this case, we expect that people are really determined to do something. But we know that this theory, in some cases, is not able to explain why, although we are motivated, our motivation does not transform into this action. So this may be probably a limit of this theory. This theory is good to understand volitional behavior, so where people really intend to do something and there is probably a specific and clear outcomes. But I know that in psychology, a part of the research try to understand why basically, although we have an intention to perform something, the outcomes are totally different. So probably this is, maybe I'm not saying a limitation of the theory, but this theory has been applied in situations like losing weight, type of, how can I say, means of transportation selection, recycling behavior. So in this case, normally motivation, a high motivation lead to a high intention and at the end to a clear action. But probably there are cases where this process does not take place.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Van Lente. Then the opposition will be continued online by Professor Lang. Professor Lang is a professor in real world lab design at the Institute for Technology Assessment and Systems Analysis at the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology in Germany. He was also a member of the assessment committee. Please, Professor Lang.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks for this invitation, and also thanks a lot, Mr. Concari, for this very nice presentation and for the opportunity to read and assess your thesis. So I think it was really a very interesting read because you went through a literature analysis, a thorough literature analysis, and then also did the two empirical cases. And what I think is also particularly relevant, you also draw some practical conclusions from it and really did some recommendations for practice. And this is where my kind of two questions that are closely linked, I think, start. So in the literature review, you show how complex the waste management system is and how embedded also recycling behavior or waste behavior of individuals is. Then you did your study, and this particularly focuses on the individual behavior, and you did your study, for instance, or the two studies in two very different contexts when it comes to waste management. So on the one hand side in Italy, on the other hand side in the Netherlands. And I'm interested to learn more from you on the one hand side in how far does your research or are your results valid across different contexts? So, you know, if you do the same study in the Netherlands or in Italy, are the results still the same? And this you also mentioned in your presentation today, that for instance, the social demographic characteristics play a very important role. And in how far should this be considered, and how does this influence the validity of your results? And the second one is related to the complexity of the system. And there I would be interested, as a transdisciplinary sustainability scientist, in how far you would design a research that is not only focusing on the individual behavior, but really is interdisciplinary research, considering the multitude of factors that you have presented also in your literature review, and maybe then as a transdisciplinary research also includes stakeholders in the concrete development of concrete measures to be implemented. So the one is the validity of the results across different contexts, and the second one is really how would you suggest to embed the research that you have done in a inter and transdisciplinary research approach to really develop then strategies to foster sustainable waste management.
So, highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your question. So, first of all, I clarify that my research was mainly on understanding waste separation behavior. So this is the big difference between the theory of planned behavior or the theory of reasonable pursuit and other theories. So the key point is I try to study why people behave in a certain way. So what does it mean? That the recommendation that I propose in my thesis obviously need to be tested. So this is to be clear. I wanted to complete my thesis with some recommendation and some proposal on how to intervene in the future. But I clarify that in every scientific approach, obviously this type of process requires, again, an analysis of the context and a selection of specific procedures. So this is just to clarify that my proposals needs to be tested in real life. So I agree that in some cases it will be useful to first, not in some cases, it will be useful to, in general, to understand the context. So for example, the context in Italy is quite different from the Netherlands. To give you an example, in Italy, people who recycle do not have any fear of getting a fine. So basically, you can improperly recycling without getting any kind of, let's say, punishment, any kind of fee. Another example, people are quite disappointed with the waste management company. This is the case of Rome. So what does it mean? That people show not very high level of motivation like it can be, for example, in Germany or in the Netherlands. Obviously, this data, I repeat, I did not test it in practice, so I cannot tell you that are 100% sure. I can guarantee that there are some differences related to socio-cultural situation between the different parts of Europe. In fact, one of my suggestions is to do comparative analysis, because comparative analysis may have the advantage of better highlight why let's say an intervention measure may work in a situation and may not work in another situation. So for this reason, I mentioned, for example, like introducing a reward scheme, because let's make another example. If the final user is a person with limited economic capability, maybe motivating him with a reduction of the recycling fee can be effective. While if the person is, for example, a rich people, probably we have to work on other type of goals or motivation to improve his recycling. In relation to the stakeholders, if I got it correctly, before you were talking about the stakeholders and involving all level in the improvement of the waste separation. The reason why I said that, it was because on the one hand, we have to focus on individual, because individual for sure are the final, how can I say, a more evident part of this chain. And for sure, although they have an individual gives small contribution, we do need also is determination in improving waste management. On the other hand, my message was to show that, I give you an example. In Italy, many industries are not obliged to utilize recycling plastic. While I know that, for example, in Germany, there are some famous drinks that can be bought in bottles that are recycled. So in this sense, I wanted to highlight the fact that the legal and institutional framework can really favor waste separation and waste recycling. In Italy, it's not the case. Then another message that I wanted to pass is that the involvement is at all levels, because let's think about the school. First of all, a school, obviously we need to act in different way as a teacher with pupils and with, let's say, adult learners. Probably adult learners are more sensitive to, let's say, high-level goals, while a kid needs to be, how can I say, needs to be better explained with basic concepts. So my message is, not only at the governmental and industrial level we have to intervene, but also, for example, at the school level. And another example may be, for example, elders. I wanted to pass the message that we have to distinguish our intervention based on the age. For sure, at least in Italy, old people, like 80 years old people, have almost never been used to recycle waste. So in this case, probably to develop an environmental motivation of some goal, we may work, for example, on health-related goals, not on environmental protection in itself, differently from a young people. So did I answer your question about stakeholders and all levels?
So do I have time for a small follow-up?
Time is already running out in view of the times to the others. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry for that. Yeah. So the opposition will now be continued by Professor De Wit. Professor De Wit is also joining us online, and he's a professor of interdisciplinary social science at the Faculty of Public Health at Utrecht University, and was also a member of the assessment committee. Professor De Wit.
Thank you, Pro-Rector. Dear candidate, let me first congratulate you on your on the great work that you did and that you report in your PhD dissertation, and let me also involve your supervisory team in my congratulations. I think I'm going to follow up a bit from the conversation you had with Professor Lang, but perhaps in a slightly different way. Could I ask one of the paronyms to read out loud Proposition 1?
Yeah, you can also do it yourself. There's no paronyms now. I'm standing here. Yeah.
I can. Okay. Nowadays, waste management is a topical issue, and human behavior is a key to the success of waste management procedures. This is my first proposition.
Thank you very much. I think the first aspect that waste management is a topical issue is probably uncontroversial in most of society. Perhaps you have been noticing, as I have, that there's many commentators now in society who basically say that the grand challenges of our contemporary societies, like waste management, energy transition, climate change, should not be pitched as an individual problem. It's, you hardly can blame us individually because we do for taking the plane, for instance, and that we should look at this as social and structural problems. And I was wondering how you align that sort of perspective or that criticism on what many of us psychologists, I identify as a psychologist, just to be clear about that, what many of us do in terms of behavioral science. Do you see how those two things can be reconciled, or?
I hope I got your point. If you can please repeat the last point. You said if.
Yes, basically you focus on individual behavior and factors. And many critics say we should focus on structural and societal issues. And how do you see the relevance of focusing on behavior in the context of that criticism?
Okay, let's say that during my thesis, I realized that I focus, as you correctly said, on a specific topic, which is individual behavior. And as you correctly said, individual behavior is influenced by the surrounding context. So let's say that probably the individual behavior in itself is okay as an initial approach, because we need to understand some basic mechanism, and probably that's the intention of the theory of planned behavior, to understand why. But as I said before, this is basically a theory that just tries to understand why. So we probably need to think about the next step, how to apply what we learn through the application of this theory. Probably the application of this theory is, let's say, is just the starting point for the next step, which are intervention. So in this case is when we have to understand what is the relationship of the individual with the context and with the other stakeholders. So for example, when before, I'm trying to go back, when I did my systematic literature review, I realized that beside the individual, obviously there are many other influences. Here I also realized that the theory of planned behavior probably is not able to, but does not highlight some aspect related to the background. So probably at this stage, the next step will be to apply a clear process to give to obtain a clear outcome, because in itself just studying the reason why something happened is not clear, is not enough. So the next step will be to understand how to implement corrective measures. And in this case, I think that it's important to analyze, as I said, the legal institutional framework, the infrastructural situation, and the informational aspect, the contextual and collective aspect. So let's say that my next future studies will be more focused on applying intervention at different levels, because at present, to be honest, I mainly focus on the understanding. So I admit, and I thank you for your suggestion, probably to look more at the other stakeholder and better understand how to interact with them, because for sure this is, let's say, a limitation of my research. It's just understanding, is not focus on future measure. Also, I propose some, how can I say, some recommendations. So I agree that this will be a good topic to explore in the future. Thank you very much, Professor.
Well, and thank you for that. Your answer raises a range of other questions, but one question that I'm interested in is you look at extending the theory of planned behavior, the recent action approaches many people before you have tried, and you're inspired by what Isaac Eisen himself has done. But there's also work that Martin Fischbein has done to extend the theory of planned behavior and reasoned action. I'm not sure whether you're familiar with that, but Martin Fischbein doesn't focus on additional motivational factors. He focuses on factors to do with skills and the environment. And do you think that would be useful to extend the theory of planned behavior in that way?
Here we open a big debate, which is related to the general, let's say we have to find the right balance between generalization and being able to correctly analyze all situations. So one of the critique to the theory of planned behavior was that, not to the theory of planned behavior, but to the way the theory has been applied, that the researcher tends to add additional construct. So the next question is, do this construct improve the predictive capability of the theory, or do they simply try to give a new version of this theory? So that's why one of the critiques that I read was that in the last year there was a proliferation of extended theory of planned behavior model. So probably we have to find the right balance between the generalization capability and the, let's say, capability to correctly analyze a situation. Because I give you a simple example. If people are not able to recycle, it may be because, for example, the waste bins are not in the right position or they are not big enough. I'm making a simple example. This type of information, which is very contextual, is not directly addressed by the theory of planned behavior. So this factor, the one that I study, like functionality of road bins, is considered in the precursor of intention. So probably we have to find the right balance. We have on the one hand to respect the basic principle of a theory, and that sometimes it's not so easy as it seems. On the other hand, we have to carefully add new constructs, making sure that they follow the basic principle described by Eisen, which are like either fine principle like compatibility, predictability, and causality. So probably we have to find the right balance between these two different needs. One, to be able to study in detail a specific situation. The other one, to be able to apply the theory to different situations.
Thank you. Mr. Florent, can I ask a very short follow-up question?
Yeah, we are only with 15 minutes left and 2 more other opponents, so I'm gonna have to pass on that. Thank you very much for your questions, Professor De Wit. The opposition will now be continued by Dr. Meertens. Dr. Meertens was also a member of the assessment committee. She is associate professor at the Department of Health Promotion at the Faculty of Health Medicine and Life Sciences at this university.
Thank you very much. Dear candidate, also I would like to compliment you with your thesis. It's really on a relevant topic and also a timely one. And you already published some papers in this thesis that are reported in this thesis, and did a variety of research methods. And of course, that's very good. But however, I'm here to ask you a question, so that's what I will do. And I would like to ask you a question about chapter 2, your systematic review. And in the end, my question boils down to the question, is it indeed a systematic review? Because in my view, systematic review has several steps. It starts with, of course, with a research question and then doing a systematic search, going out from this research question with predefined databases, relevant ones, and with a search strategy that's determined in advance. Then the second step is that you select from search you did the papers that along predefined inclusion and exclusion criteria. And then in the third one, you are going to, in the third step, you are going to extract information based on your research question. And preferably you do that as step 2 with 2 persons, but of course, sometimes that's just not possible. But you extract the information that is relevant for your research question. And then in the last part, you are going to have conclusions, in step 4, conclusions based on the data you extracted, usually in a table. And the first 2 steps, that's exactly what you did. But in steps 3 and 4, you did it a bit different because you extract information, you have a data extraction table, but that is not, that's quite basic, and you didn't extract information from these papers that is directly relevant for your research questions, except for maybe the theory used, but it's about the country, about the year. You showed also a bit in your presentation. about that, but not on the research questions. And then you are going also in step 4 a bit further with your conclusions. So not only on the data you extracted, but also a bit further, referring to your research questions. So that's the difference. And that's, at least in my view, this means that it's not really a systematic review, because the reader cannot really follow and check where you base your conclusions upon. So my question is, do you still think this is a systematic review, or do you think maybe in hindsight it would have been better to call it, let's say, a review with a systematic search, or scoping review, or something else? So what is your opinion on this?
Okay, Estimo Pone, thank you very much for your words, and I thank you very much for your question, because probably I'm learning also at this stage, so how to improve my research. So I can say this, that my first research question, how are the concept of pro-environmental consumer behavior and similar terms understood, is probably answered. But I agree that the other question on the interplay between pro-environmental consumer behavior and green consumer behavior probably would have required, let's say, a better tailoring, as you said, of my systematic review. So I think that my systematic review is able to answer the final objective of the understanding what are the concepts, the theoretical framework, and the main factors. As you correctly said, my systematic review should have been a little bit more clear in relation to the interplay between pro-environmental consumer behavior and generic consumer behavior. Because in this case, now I'm going through the selection criteria. So basically, my search query was based on terms like waste management, waste minimization, waste reuse, and then all the other groups of terms related to behavior, like pro-environmental behavior, etc. So probably to better answer the research question number 2, the interplay, I should have also added terms like interplay. And this will probably have given me a better view of the paper useful to answer the research question number 2. And also number 3, because it says what are the condition and factor influencing this interplay. So I admit that my research were more focused on, yes, terms like recycling, reduction, pro-environmental behavior, but for example, the topic of interplay is not actually inserted in the search query. So I think that I came out with useful outcome, but as you correctly said, they were not, I should have better selected probably the journals in relation to some specific questions. And so I thank you very much for your suggestion. So probably this is a good reason to think about again my future systematic review, to make sure that it's systematic, so there is a clear question and the terms in the question are reflected in the search query and obviously in the final outcomes. So thank you very much for your suggestion.
Thank you for your answer.
Thank you, Dr. Meertens. Then the opposition will be continued by Dr. Den Hoor. Dr. Den Hoor is assistant professor at the Department of Work and Social Psychology at the Faculty of Psychology and Neuroscience here at Maastricht University. He was also a member of the assessment committee. Dr. Den Hoor.
Thank you. Dear candidates, also from my side, my compliments for this great work, and I read your thesis with a lot of interest. Also want to extend my compliments to the supervisory team. But of course, I also have questions. And I would actually first want to continue on the question by Dr. Meertens, after which I will continue with some questions that follow up on Dr. van Lente's questions. Because I definitely enjoyed reading your thesis, but for me it especially became more and more interesting starting at chapter 4 when you started talking about motivation. But before I get to that point, I would first like to start with some questions about the systematic reviews in chapter 2 and 3. And don't get me wrong in this, because I really applaud the enormous work that you've done in these chapters and appreciate the rigorous analysis that you conducted there. But there are a few things that, from how I was trained, do not completely understand here. On these questions, probably a short answer so that we have some more time to discuss the motivational questions. I was wondering, what is actually the additional value of some of the answers that you found in these chapters? Because you did many analysis related to the journals, you did many analysis related to citations, strategical views per time period. So what was your specific goal behind doing these kind of analysis, and why didn't you more look into the content of these papers, like what were the most important determinants found in these papers, or what was the effective methodology found in the papers, or were there effective interventions that could be useful for future research? So again, please a short answer on this question, because the next questions
okay.
are more interesting,
So,
hopefully.
to be clear, during my PhD journey, I learned new methods. So basically at the beginning it was like, why don't I try this bibliometric and text mining? Then reading why it's useful is to better frame the conceptual framework. So my concern was, I'm new in the sector, and although I had two great promoters, my concern was to make sure to do the right steps. So that's why I decided, beside the systematic literature review, to go also for a bibliometric analysis and conceptual mapping. So my concern was to make sure to frame correctly the problem. So the first step, as you notice, systematic literature review was on pro-environmental behavior. The second one, bibliometrics, was on recycling. So I was basically narrowing the field and try to make sure I correctly framed the problem and I correctly understood what was the conceptual framework.
Okay, thanks a lot. That clarifies a lot for me, so thank you. The other question that I had was more related to the motivational part, and for that I would like to put another theory on the table, the self-determination theory. Are you aware of the self-determination theory?
So could you please speak in a loud voice, because I'm a little...
So I would like to add another theory on the table, namely the self-determination theory. Have you heard of the self-determination theory? Are you familiar with this theory?
To be honest, it came out like one of the utilized theory, the self-determination, but at the end I did not investigate it, because according to the systematic literature review, did not come out like one of the most, how can I say, applied theory for recycling behavior. In fact, a big problem is, and that was a critique from some scholars, is that we tend to overutilize the theory of planned behavior. So to keep it simple, again, I did not want to test new fields of unless I had the convincement that that was a good theory. So at the end, the selection of the TPP, it was, I tell you clearly, most diffuse framework. The one that where Eisen says we may add construct. So I said maybe I can add one or two construct by being careful. And the last reason it was because I tend to see, probably it's a limitation, recycling behavior like quite volitional behavior. So at the end I went for TPP and I did not investigate the possibility of that.
All right, well, thank you. Because I think especially this theory was extremely helpful and relevant for the topic that you were looking at, because you included motivation, and self-determination theory is a theory completely about motivation. And this theory actually further divides motivation into many different motivations, ranging from external, extrinsic motivation. People do something because there is an extrinsic reward or punishment, or people on the other side of the continuum do something just because they really like to do it, intrinsic motivation. This continuum of motivation basically also explains that motivation is not about the amount, it's not about you are more or less motivated, but it's about the quality of the motivation. And if you think about the quality of motivation, then it's actually linking to Professor Van Lente's question, can you be motivated but have no intention to do something? Well, I can imagine that people can be extrinsically motivated. For example, Professor Koch is punishing me if I'm not running a marathon tomorrow or whatever. Then I have the extrinsic motivation here, but I have no intention to run a marathon. However, if I will be intrinsically motivated to do something, then I'm sure that my intention will also be very high, and then I can actually agree with Professor Van Lente that the motivation and the intention are exactly the same. So, of course, the theory goes further than this, but by just looking at this short explanation of this theory, that motivation is actually not just you have more or less motivation, but you have a range from being extrinsically rewarded or punished, or you are motivated to do something intrinsically. How would you put that in your findings in this case?
So first of all, thank you, esteemed opponent, for your comments, because to be clear, this is something I have to investigate. In fact, I tell you what surprised me. I think also Professor Koch asked me, Alessandro, why there are just 2 examples of the TRGP at present? TRGP is where we put together, let's say, concept of goal and motivation with the typical TPP predictors. I asked myself why. The answer was probably, let's say, we are overestimating the capability of TPP. That's a possibility. The other thing is probably Eisen and Kruklanski try to put together 2 things, but
Alessandro Concari, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and your defense. I request that you and your company await the result of our deliberations and our return in this room. I adjourn.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Long road to the south side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. I know what's on the line. I know you know that I can't read your mind. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Take the mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. And even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you've won the battle once you've grown. side. 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and night. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and night. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. 'Cause I'll go the extra mile.
I reopen this session. Alessandro Concari, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense. In view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor Martens is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. I invite your supervisor to now take the floor.
Please all rise.
Do you promise to work in accordance with the principle of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
Yes, I promise.
By the authority invested by us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Alessandro Concari, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee, and affirmed with the official seal of the university. Dear Alessandro, dear Dr. Concari, it's my pleasure to have been the first one to congratulate you. According to my files, the first time you contacted me was August 2017. You emailed me with a very nice email, saying you were looking for a supervisor. You introduced yourself as an Italian Air Force officer recently assigned to a NATO installation in Brunsum. You indicated to take advantage of your 3 to 4 year assignment in Brunsum to be part-time and self-funding PhD student at Maastricht University. As your email was so nice and your CV very much in line with my interest, consumer trends, human behavior, social interactions, I became interested to discuss things further. Also, your master's dissertation at the Faculty of Social Science of Teramo University on the modeling of soft variables was very interesting to me. I remember we had some email exchanges about the choice of your topic of your thesis and the time needed to complete it. Although you are not a typical PhD student, being somewhat older than the average student, but definitely wiser, you were also doing it next to a very, very busy job. So your initial plans to finish your thesis in 4 to 5 years seemed a little optimistic to me. But I've never been to military service, so I really underestimated the discipline you had as an officer. You managed to finish your PhD slightly over 5 years, and I think is a huge achievement next to the busy job you had. Coming back to the earlier stages of your PhD, it was rather a coincidence that I happened to live in Brunsum as well, the place where you were stationed and lived with your family. So for me, it was a nice walk to the NATO head office to discuss the topic of your thesis with you. And I remember you offered several topics, all very interesting. But because they all were very interesting, and you have a broad interest as well, it was not easy to decide which route to take in your research. And I think once I stressed the fact that you need to do what you wanted to do best and what you like best, that made you finally decide on the thesis topic you defended today. Very soon after the two of us met, we contacted Gerjo to be your second supervisor. And I think we both agree that his input has been of the utmost importance. So Gerjo, thanks for giving your time and the knowledge I did not have in the PhD supervision of Alessandro. Very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Your PhD. During your PhD, you also managed to be part, somewhat, to the Maastricht University community by, for example, supervising some master students along the way. And I think we did not thank you enough for that during the way. So thanks again for that as well. As you were an external PhD with a job, we did not meet that often. Maybe this was the reason that your emails were long, very long, sometimes very, very long. But they were interesting, forcing Gerjo and myself to think along with you, and sharpening our thoughts as well. So many thanks for that. Also, our Zoom meetings were always a pleasure to have. I love to listen to you, not only for your structured ideas and planning, but also for your very charming, typical Italian English accent. You moved back to Italy in 2020, after you had been bitten by a tick and fallen sick. And also you had to hand over your work in the Netherlands. There you got even more busy than you were over here, in your new job as the head of the academic field study branch at the NATO headquarters, Defense College in Rome. You had to organize field studies around the world in COVID time, you imagine. At the same time you were trying to complete your move to your new home, you had some thieves stealing your suitcase containing all your papers. Not very interesting to them, but a loss to you. They are essential papers for you. Well, Alessandro, you are a survivor, so you survived. And maybe even more important than your academic achievements, you published most of your work in international journals, we got to know you as someone who is very smart, open-minded, stubborn if needed, but a very, very nice person. You cooked for Gerju and me at your home, where we met Francesco as well. You were very attentive in sending once in a while an email asking how we are doing. Usually you should do that as supervisor to the student, but you did the other way around as well. You invited us for a small dinner in Maastricht and for a barbecue. I will still remember that. Dear Alessandro, I already said that you achieved a lot the last several years. I think that I also speak on behalf of Gerju when I say that we also learned a lot from you. It's not always easy to do a PhD next to a responsible job, but you always kept your spirits high. Your working ethics and nice character is something we can all learn from. Dr. Concari, again my sincere congratulations to you and your family. They must be very proud of you. And in my best Italian, I will end by saying, Caro Dottor Alessandro, congratulazioni. Ti auguro tanta fortuna per il futuro. Ci vediamo sicuramente. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Dear Dr. Concari, also on behalf of Maastricht University, I congratulate you with the degree you have acquired. And I would like to extend these congratulations also to the family and hopefully all the relatives and friends that are watching online. And also my thanks to all the committee members here and online for all the efforts they put into this work. Well, that brings us to the end of this ceremony. So let me close that straight away. And all I have are some household